So I want to tell you about one of my dearest friends in the world. Her name is Meredith. She has been my best friend for over 20 years. And this is a woman who has a seemingly supernatural gift for hospitality. I do not know how she does it, but she seems to transform every space she's in, whether it's hers or someone else's, into like a cozy, intentional hotspot for connection and great conversation. We were roommates for a very short period of time. Her husband had just started basic training. I moved to Dallas for grad school. She moved to Dallas with me and moved into my apartment, and we lived together for a little while. And I was the only single person in my entire apartment complex when she moved in. And somehow, as soon as she got there, like our apartment was the de facto spot for every baby shower or, like study group session or holiday party. It all ended up happening at our place. And it was just her. She was like so gifted at this. Now, they've been a military family about as long as I've known her, so they've moved around a lot, and I got to see this gift of hers play out in a variety of settings wherever God had her. Whether it was base housing or they lived for a while in a fifth wheel camper while raising little babies. They stayed with family members between assignments sometimes, and now they've settled back in her husband's hometown where they bought an old farmhouse and put down roots. And no matter where they've lived or how much space they had to work with, I always knew that when I went to visit my friend, there would be space for me, and I would feel at home in her home. She just has a gift. Have you guys ever experienced that? Do you have somebody that's coming to mind that they just make you feel so welcome and so loved when you're in their home that pretty much anytime you get an invitation from them, it's an automatic yes? Anybody have somebody like that? I'd love to hear from a couple people. Who are the people with gifts of hospitality in your life?
Well, not because she's my mom. It's my mom.
It's your mom, yeah.
She's that person for everybody else that I know.
Yeah, yeah. What is it you love about being in her house?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, she's a good cook. So
Good cook helps.
I mean, she's so accommodating. She's always making sure everybody else has everything that they could possibly need.
Yeah.
She does anything for herself, almost to the point of driving me crazy. But it's a gift, and I know it's a
Yeah.
gift. It's not a gift that I have, and I'm aware of that. But she definitely.
That's awesome. I think many people have experienced that gift here. Who else? Who do you know that has this gift?
I'm not going to brag on your wife, but I have a wife that is very much like that.
Yeah.
Always open. Just an example, this morning, my grandson has 2 kids and they're homesick.
Oh.
So he came down to pick up some things for lunch, and she gave them to me, and then he stole a piece of my apple pie. So she always has things like that, so that the kids know that will be available.
Mm-hmm.
People, no matter who you are,
Yeah.
stop by, she'll take care of you. And she's just a fantastic.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. We maybe have time for one more. Sharon?
Well, we have some friends
Mm-hmm.
that moved away, so we don't get to do this as much anymore. Jim and Debbie Iverson were
Mm-hmm.
good friends of ours when we were raising our kids. And I'm telling you, their home is just always open. They're the kind of spontaneous friend that's like, why don't you come over? We're going to make chili tonight. Or why don't you come over? We're
Yeah.
making Chinese food. There was no elaborate preparation. You show up, everybody does their thing. You just felt at home in their kitchen, at their house, wherever. If they say, oh, we're going to go walk in the snow, I'll come down. It's like, oh, yeah, we'd love to do that.
Yeah, you just join the family. You do what they do. Nothing's off limits. I love that. Yeah. Man, don't we love it when we experience that? Like, that kind of being at home in somebody else's home, that they made space for us. Like, I love that. Now, we have spent the last couple of months in this series that we're calling In the Flesh. And in this series, we're talking about what Jesus' incarnation means for us as his followers. Because Jesus came in the flesh to give us the best example of the kind of life that we get to live in the kingdom of God. And our goal around here has always been to learn from Jesus how to live and love like he does. We often quote the theologian Dallas Willard, who said, "Discipleship is the process of becoming who Jesus would be if he were you." And so I wonder, like, if Jesus were living in your community, if he were living in your house, how would he leverage home to love God and love others where you are? That's the question that we're going to wrestle with today. And it's been a really fun one for me to wrestle with, honestly. The good news that we're going to proclaim today is this: Jesus came in the flesh to make his home among us. And if our hearts are now his home, then our homes can be a reflection of his heart. And when we open the doors of our home and our hearts, we invite others to come home to God's love for them too. I think that's such a beautiful and practical thing we can do to love on people in our community. The foundational scripture that we've looked at throughout this series is John 1:14, which says, in my favorite translation, "The Word became flesh and made his home among us. We have seen his glory, glory like that of a father's only son, full of grace and truth." Jesus made his home among us. He left a perfect home in heaven to come move into the neighborhood among humans and show us what it looks like to become human the way God always dreamed we could be. And given how much of our time and life and energy and money goes into living in and maintaining our homes, we have to ask ourselves, what would it look like for us to do home the way that Jesus might if he were living in our home? And that's a little tricky for us to answer because we know Jesus spent the majority of his public ministry traveling around. So his relationship to home is a little different than most of ours. I guess if we wanted to get really literal about it, we'd have to just go walking around and then invite ourselves over to strangers' houses when we met them. That's kind of how Jesus rolled. I don't recommend that. Let's maybe not try that. But Jesus, he often stayed with other people, friends, disciples, supporters, even people that he had just met. And we get to see what he was like when he was at home in these different contexts and what postures and practices that he prioritized when he did home and was at home with different people. And if we want to do home like Jesus does home, I think there are some things, some practices, some postures that we will take on ourselves. We're going to take a look at 3 of them today. When we do home like Jesus, our doors will be open. Our doors are open. The word hospitality, it actually comes from a Latin word, hospitem, which means guest, stranger, sojourner, visitor, or foreigner, which means that hospitality is quite literally welcoming someone who is a stranger to us. Jesus often spent time in the homes of some pretty unlikely people, and they were often people he had just met, and he faced a ton of criticism for it from the religious leaders of his day. A really great example of this is a classic Sunday school story we've all heard about Zacchaeus. We're going to read Luke's account of it here. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through town. A man there named Zacchaeus, a ruler among tax collectors, was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he couldn't because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed up a sycamore tree so he could see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. When Jesus came to that spot, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down at once. I must stay in your home today." So Zacchaeus came down at once, happy to welcome Jesus. Everyone who saw this grumbled, saying, "He's gone to be the guest of a sinner." Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone, I repay them 4 times as much." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this household, because he too is a son of Abraham. The human one came to seek and save the lost." This same kind of situation played out over and over again in Jesus' life. People who the religious leaders of the day never would have associated with at all met Jesus, and they felt so seen and loved and welcome that they opened the doors of their home to him, and in turn, the doors of their hearts opened too. Their lives were forever changed because Jesus chose to make his home among them and be at home in their home. And the early church, naturally, trying to live like Jesus, they followed this example, and they prioritized opening the doors of their homes and welcoming others who needed a place to rest. It was a huge value among them. I'm going to roll through just some quick examples to highlight where we see this over and over again throughout the New Testament. Acts 28:7 says, Publius, the island's most prominent person, owned a large estate in that area. He welcomed us warmly into his home as his guests for 3 days. Romans 16 says, Gaius, who is a host to me and to the whole church, says hello to you. To the whole church. Contribute to the needs of God's people and welcome strangers into your home. The author of Hebrews says, don't neglect to open up your homes to guests, because by doing this, some have been hosts to angels without knowing it. And then kind of the classic description of the early church is in Acts 2, and they say every day they met together in the temple and ate in their homes. They shared food with gladness and simplicity. I think these early Jesus followers, they knew the power of opening their doors. They knew how lives could be changed when Jesus made others feel at home. So they began to open their homes and open their doors and leverage their homes to become places where people could not only hear about the good news of Jesus' grace, but also experience it tangibly. Jesus came in the flesh to make his home among us. And what that means is if our hearts are now his home, then our homes get to be reflections of his heart. So when we open the doors of our homes and our hearts, we invite other people to come home to God's love for them too. So when we do Home Like Jesus, our doors will be open. But another thing that happens when we do Home Like Jesus is our hands are going to get dirty. Because Jesus didn't just walk into somebody's home and expect to be doted on and treated like a king. He could have. He was. But instead, he got his hands dirty by serving other people. When they ran out of wine at the wedding, Jesus steps in, fixes the problem. When he's staying with somebody and somebody in the house is sick, or in Lazarus' case, even dead, Jesus healed them. He had this uncanny ability to see people's real needs and burdens and step in and get his hands dirty to relieve them. And this was such an important part of the example that Jesus was leaving for us to follow, that on his last night together with his disciples, he gives them a little object lesson in what it looks like to serve each other. As they were preparing to share what he knew would be their last meal together, Jesus quietly gets up from the table, he goes and gathers some supplies, and he kneels down and begins to wash his disciples' feet. And they freak out about it, rightly so, because I think we can all agree feet are pretty disgusting. But I think feet then, like, they're wearing sandals, they walk everywhere on dirt roads where animals are also free-ranging. I'm like, it's not a fun job. But the other reason that they're freaking out is because this is a job that was reserved for the very lowest ranked servant in the house. And Jesus chooses to do it. He takes that on. So when the disciples rightly protest this situation, here's what Jesus says. You call me teacher and Lord, and you speak correctly because I am. If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you too must wash each other's feet. Once again, Jesus shows up and he blows up their categories and dividing lines, and he invites them to get their hands dirty by serving one another. Now, I don't recommend the next time you have guests over, you try to wash their feet. That would be weird. I feel like it would make them feel less comfortable and less welcome, not more. It was a different time. There were different burdens than we have today. But instead, how can we look for ways that we can serve guests who come into our home in ways that make them feel cared for and comfortable? It doesn't have to be big, giant things. It can be small stuff. If you have a big group of people at your home and somebody new comes in, just take the time to stop whatever you're doing. Introduce them to everyone. Make sure they've made some connections so they don't get stuck in awkward small talk or hanging out in the corner trying to wait for somebody to talk to them. Maybe just give them a quick tour of the house so they don't have to wonder or explore or ask somebody when they need to use the restroom, Make sure they feel comfortable. Make sure they feel at home. Put yourself in the shoes of the other person and ask, if I were walking in here right now for the first time, what would I need to know? What would I need to experience to feel at home here? And then serve the other person accordingly. It doesn't have to be big. It's a posture that we take toward serving other people. And over the course of conversation and time together, you may discover that there are also more significant burdens that they're carrying. And that's when God may prompt you to help alleviate those as well. The importance is the posture that we take. Jesus modeled going the extra mile to serve others. And we embody this posture of Jesus when we look for opportunities to get our hands dirty and to serve others who are in our path and come into our homes. Jesus came in the flesh to make his home among us. And what that means is our hearts are now his home. So our homes can be reflections of his heart, where when people come in and we open the doors of our home and our heart, they feel served, they feel cared for, and we invite others to experience God's love for them as well. So when we do home like Jesus, our doors will be open, our hands will get dirty, but also our tables are prepared. Do you know what Jesus did right after he washed the disciples' feet? He ended up sharing a meal with them. It was the meal that we now refer to as the Last Supper, the one where the practice of communion originated. And I love what Hugh Halter says about this in his book Flesh, which we've been recommending as a read-along throughout this series. Hugh says, for Jesus, eating with people was the final word on acceptance. It was where the most meaningful conversations happened, and the table became the symbol of true sacrament. That's why we call the Eucharist the Lord's Supper. On the same night that Jesus washed feet, he was reclining at a table, and he took bread and wine and asked the disciples to remember him every time they sat down to eat. He asked them to remember this whole night he had spent with them. Remember how I made a spot for you at the table? Remember how I accepted you, even some of you who would reject me and sell me out? Remember how I stooped down to wash your feet? Now remember me as you rip bread from a loaf and drink great wine. Everything at the table should remind you of me. That night, Jesus modeled what he had taught in numerous parables about the table. It was a picture of heaven. Now, we have talked a lot around here about the significance of shared meals. This is not a new value for us. We spent a whole year initiative practicing eating together intentionally. And it's not for the sake of eating together. It's because eating together has an uncanny ability to help us learn to listen to each other and build relationships and uncover ways that we can serve one another. But I think there's something extra special about sharing a meal with someone in your home and inviting them to be a guest at your table. It communicates that you've prepared for them. You've made room in your home and at your table for them to join in and be part of the family. And conversations that happen around a shared meal in a home environment like that, there's such a wonderful opportunity for us to embody the love of a God who makes room at the table for all of us forever. John 14, 1-3 says, don't be troubled, trust in God. Trust also in me. My Father's house has room to spare. If that weren't the case, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? When I go to prepare a place for you, I will return and take you to be with me, so that where I am, you will be too. Guys, Jesus is making room at his table for all of us so that we can be part of his family forever. And when we make room at our table for others, we invite them to experience a small taste of what it will be like to be part of God's loving family in heaven forever. It's one way that we can bring more of up there, down here. And if Jesus lives in the flesh through us now, and we embody his love, then we'll find ourselves throwing open the doors of our home and looking for opportunities to get our hands dirty and serve people while they're with us, and we'll prepare room at our tables for them. Jesus came in the flesh to make his home among all of us. And if our hearts are now his home, then our homes get to be reflections of his heart. When we open the doors of our homes and of our hearts, we invite others to come home to God's love for them. Now, I will be honest with you, as I began preparing for this message, it was incredibly convicting to me. I used to be a lot better at this. Even when we had small kids and sleepless nights, and our house was always a wreck, we regularly opened our home to other people. We have a family tradition where we have big breakfasts kind of late on Saturday morning. And we would often invite friends or family or just anybody who happened to be around to join us in that. And it was really low key. If church got canceled for weather or something, we'd think about people who lived nearby who could safely get there, and we'd invite them to just come spend the morning with us since they had unexpected time. And then 2020 happened. And because of some medical situations that we were dealing with in my family and just general love of neighbor and trying to practice that well, the rhythms that we had developed were disrupted. And the problem is when the world opened back up and the risk level lowered, our rhythms didn't just naturally reset themselves. Those spaces began to fill in with things like work and other obligations. And we've been feeling lately that every member of our family kind of feels that void in our souls because somehow we are a family of extroverts and we love having people in our home. Life just took over and filled in all the spaces. And even before I found out I was teaching on this topic, Craig and I started to have some conversations about what it would look like for us to return to those rhythms again and begin to prioritize opening our home more regularly. And as we were having the conversation, our kids jumped in and they had ideas because they're excited about it, because they love welcoming friends and new people into their home. And one of the cool things was, as Craig and I started talking about it, it wasn't just like our close friends and our family, the people we would think about. It was like we had some of the same totally unexpected names. People that honestly the doors to a relationship felt like it was closed for a long time, and we'd been praying about like, maybe it's time to just extend an invitation. We don't know what they're going to do, but we can follow that prompting from God. So as we're preparing for this holiday season, it's a time frame where people are a little more open to saying yes to an invitation, and we're looking at our calendars and saying, okay, all we can do is extend the invitation. We'll see what happens. But that's on our calendar. That's something that we're going to do over the next couple of months. Because I deeply believe that Jesus came in the flesh to make his home among us. And if I believe that Jesus' home is my heart, then I want my home to reflect his heart as well. And I want to be able to invite others into my home and for them to experience God's love and care for them while they're there. I think that opening our homes in an incarnational way is one of the best ways for us to bless our neighbors, which of course is our focus for this whole year, how we can practice blessing our neighbors. And this is an opportunity to literally get all 5 of the blessed practices that we talk about in. Beginning with prayer, listening, eating, serving, sharing stories. They're all key components of what it looks like to welcome people to our tables like Jesus in the flesh. And we've been using this new tool that we have available called the Bless app for the last couple of months. If you have downloaded the Bless app, go ahead and grab that and open it up. I want you to navigate to your neighbor list or your dashboard. If you have not downloaded it yet, everybody else is getting out their phones. So grab your phone, there's a QR code, you can start downloading it right now. You probably won't have it set up yet, but that's okay. You've started the process, okay? I want you to look over that list of neighbors. And as you look over it, I think a lot of us are doing things like praying, and we're, maybe logging that, or maybe we're forgetting to, but we're praying. Now you can log it since you have it open. But what about the other 4 blessed practices? Are there opportunities to listen or eat? When you look at those names, does an obvious next step jump out to you? Or is there a name that you're like, man, I want to connect with them in some way? Who could you maybe invite over the next week or 2 to share a meal? Okay, now I want you to get even more practical. I grabbed my phone, made sure I had it with me, so I can do this along with you. Because it's really easy for us to have a good intention, and then 20 minutes from now, forget about it and not do anything with it. So here's what we're going to do. Open your calendar app or your reminders app. And I want you to set a reminder for later this afternoon or maybe tomorrow to reach out to the person that stood out to you and just set something up. Invite them over for a meal or whatever. If a name didn't stand out, set a reminder to pray that God will show you someone that you can open your doors to, okay? So I'm giving you time to do that right now. I'm going to do it too. Okay. For me, it's a neighbor. It's a neighbor that that we have not had much connection to. There hasn't been much openness to it, but over the last year or so, we've begun to see that God may be opening that door a little bit, and it's somebody who doesn't have a lot of connections. So we're going to invite him over. I don't know if he'll say yes, but we're going to see what happens. Okay. Jesus came in the flesh to make his home among us. If our hearts are now his home, then our homes get to be reflections of his heart. And when we open the doors of our homes and our hearts, we invite others to come home to God's love for them. And here's the thing. This is not something that we're doing for God. This is a way of living because God already lives in us. And so we just get to extend the love and the blessings that we've received from him out to others, using the resources he's already provided us, like in this case, our homes. Which means that we need to start by remembering the doors were open for us and that a place was made at the table by Jesus for us. And to help us remember and rest in that today, I think the obvious thing for us to do is for us to practice communion together. It should be probably go without saying after a message like this, but all are welcome at the communion table. If you want to participate in this, you are free and encouraged to do so. If you're joining us online, we'd love for you to grab some bread or juice, whatever you have on hand, and participate in this with us as well. In a few moments, I am going to read a scripture about communion, say a prayer, and then I want to invite you guys to come and grab the elements and go back to your seats. And before you take those, just take a moment to reflect and spend some time talking to God about what it's meant to you that he made a place at the table for you. And then I want you to ask him to show you who you need to make a place at your table for as well, who you can extend his love to as you embody his grace and truth and love in your everyday life. Okay? And then I'll come back and close us out. Okay. Paul describes the practice of communion in 1 Corinthians by saying, I received a tradition from the Lord, which I also handed on to you. On the night on which he was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took bread, and after giving thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this to remember me. He did the same thing with the cup after they had eaten, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Every time you drink it, do this to remember me. Every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, you broadcast the death of the Lord until he comes. Guys, as we come and take these elements, I want us to remember what Jesus has done for us and the place that it made for us to be part of the family, and our calling now and our opportunity to join him in extending the table, bringing up another chair to welcome somebody else to the family. Come and take.